Part 1. The First Encounter. The rain had been falling all afternoon, a steady rhythm against the old cafe windows. It was the kind of soft, endless rain that blurred the edges of the world and made time feel slower, almost tender. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the quiet aroma of coffee and freshly baked bread. Few people had chosen to step out in such weather, so the little place was nearly empty. Clara sat near the window, her hands wrapped around a porcelain cup, watching drops slide down the glass. She liked evenings like this, when the streets grew silent and the city seemed to breathe differently, gentler, calmer. For her, the rain was both comfort and reminder. Comfort, because it kept her hidden in her thoughts, and reminder because it always brought memories she wasn't sure she wanted to face. She opened her notebook, the pages half filled with sentences she had been writing for months, stories that no one else would read, fragments of her heart that she wasn't brave enough to speak aloud. She wrote about dreams, about loneliness, about the strange feeling of searching for something without knowing what it was. It was then that he walked in. The door opened with a small chime, and a figure stepped inside, shaking the rain from his coat. His hair was dark and slightly damp, his eyes scanning the cafe as though he wasn't sure whether to stay or leave. But then he noticed the empty table beside Clara, and with a hesitant smile at the barista, he sat down. Clara lowered her gaze quickly, pretending to be lost in her notebook, though her pen had stopped moving. There was something about him, something unexplainable. It wasn't just his presence, but the quiet way he carried himself, as though he had walked through storms far heavier than this gentle rain. For a moment, the cafe was silent again, filled only with the rain's steady voice. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke. "Do you come here often?" His voice was warm, low, almost cautious. Clara hesitated, surprised he had chosen to speak to her. "Sometimes," she replied softly. "It's quiet here. Easier to think." He nodded, as if her answer had confirmed something he already knew. "That's why I came in too. I didn't want to be alone tonight." There was no reason for his words to linger in her chest, but they did. Maybe because she understood. Maybe because she often felt the same. And so, without planning it, without even knowing his name, Clara felt that this rainy evening might change something inside her life. She didn't yet know that this was the beginning of a story that would bring her both the brightest love and the deepest sorrow. Part 2. The Conversation. The cafe seemed smaller now, as though the world outside had faded completely into the rain, leaving only the two of them in that warm, golden light. Clara closed her notebook, almost shyly, and placed her hands on her cup. She was not used to strangers starting conversations, and yet there was something unusually natural in the way he spoke, as if they had always been meant to sit here together. "I'm Daniel," he said after a pause, as though remembering that names were the beginning of all things. Clara repeated it quietly, letting the sound rest on her lips for a moment. Daniel. The name suited him, strong, but touched with a kind of softness that was rare. "I'm Clara," she replied. Daniel's eyes lifted to hers then, and for the first time, she allowed herself to meet his gaze. They were dark, but not heavy, like the night sky right before dawn, when the first light begins to show but hasn't broken through yet. He smiled faintly, and for reasons she couldn't explain, Clara felt something ease inside her chest. "Clara," he said, testing the name the way she had tested his. "It's beautiful." The words were simple, but they carried weight, and Clara had to look away, her cheeks warming. She wasn't used to being noticed like this, not in a way that felt genuine. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was almost gentle, filled with the sound of cups being set down at the counter, the whisper of rain against glass, the faint hum of a song playing somewhere in the background. "What were you writing?" Daniel asked after a while, nodding toward her closed notebook. Clara hesitated. That notebook was her hidden world. She never shared it, not even with her closest friends, but something about the way he asked, not demanding but curious in a quiet, respectful way, made her answer. "Stories," she said softly. "Just thoughts, really. Things I don't say out loud." He leaned back in his chair, as if her words had stirred something in him. "I understand that. I keep most of my thoughts hidden, too. Sometimes it feels safer that way." Clara looked at him again, wondering what kind of stories he carried, what kind of silence weighed on him. There was a depth in his eyes, a shadow that hinted at untold chapters. And so the minutes slipped by one after another, as they spoke about little things, favorite books, the comfort of rainy days, the strange way life can feel both endless and fleeting at once. Each word, each pause, seemed to weave a thread between them. By the time the rain had softened into a mist outside, Clara realized she hadn't felt this close to someone in a very long time. But she also knew, in a quiet corner of her heart, that closeness was fragile, that sometimes, when someone enters your life suddenly, it is only to change it forever, whether through joy or through loss. And as Daniel rose from his chair, thanking her for the company, promising they might meet again, Clara felt a strange mixture of hope and fear, because something told her their story was only beginning. Part 3. Returning to the Rain. The next evening, Clara found herself back at the same cafe. She told herself it was only because she liked the quiet there, because the sound of rain made it easier to write. But deep inside, she knew it was more than that. She had been thinking about Daniel ever since he left, about the way his voice had carried both warmth and sadness, about the way his eyes seemed to hold a story too heavy to tell in a single conversation. She told herself not to expect anything, not to hope. After all, strangers often pass through our lives like shadows, leaving behind only faint impressions. But when the door opened again and the small chime rang above it, Clara's heart quickened. He was there. Daniel walked in with the same unhurried steps, his coat still carrying traces of the rain outside. When he noticed her at the window, his expression softened into a smile that was quiet, almost shy, but undeniably real. "I wondered if you'd be here," he said, as he took the seat across from her. Clara felt her chest warm at his words, though she tried to answer lightly. "And I wondered if I'd see you again?" They both laughed softly, and with that, the distance between them seemed to dissolve even more easily than before. This time, their conversation was longer. Daniel spoke about his work, nothing too detailed, only that it kept him moving from place to place, never truly settled. Clara shared pieces of her writing, not by reading them aloud, but by explaining the feelings behind the words, the longing for belonging, the ache of time passing too quickly, the fragile beauty of small moments. Daniel listened carefully, as if every word she spoke mattered. And when he did speak, it was with the kind of honesty that few people dared to offer. "I think people come into our lives for a reason," he said quietly, watching the rain slide down the glass. "Sometimes we don't understand it right away, but I believe every meeting leaves a mark." Clara's breath caught at his words. She wanted to ask what mark she might leave on his life, or what mark he might leave on hers, but she stayed silent, letting the thought linger in the gentle space between them. As the night grew deeper, they eventually rose to leave, stepping out into the cool air together. The rain had faded into a soft drizzle, the streets shimmering under the dim glow of street lamps. For a few steps, they walked side by side without speaking. Clara noticed the way their shadows stretched and touched on the wet pavement, as though even the darkness knew they belonged near each other. At the corner, they paused. Daniel turned to her, his voice low. "Would you meet me here again? Tomorrow?" Clara nodded, her heart steady, yet trembling at the same time. "Yes," she whispered. And so it was decided. What had begun as a chance meeting would soon become something more. Neither of them knew yet where this path would lead, but under the quiet rain, both Clara and Daniel felt the beginning of something that might change the shape of their lives forever. Part 4. Days of Quiet Joy. From that evening on, the cafe became their place. Every night, as the rain continued its gentle visits, Clara and Daniel found each other at the same table by the window. Sometimes he arrived first, waiting with a quiet smile. Sometimes she was already there, her notebook open, her pen paused as though she had been saving her words for him. Their conversations grew longer, stretching into hours. They spoke about books they loved, about the music that made them feel less alone, about the places they dreamed of seeing someday. Daniel told her he had always wanted to live near the sea, where the sound of the waves could drown out the noise of the world. Clara admitted she had never been far from the city, but she dreamed of traveling, not to escape, but to collect moments that might later become stories. And there were moments of silence, too. Comfortable silences, the kind that didn't need to be filled. They would sit with their cups growing cold, watching the rain together, both lost in thought, yet somehow not alone in it anymore.